Just a few days ago, something unusual happened in the heart of Africa. Not a coup, not a war, not even an election. What shocked many people was something much smaller, but perhaps much more important. The army came out publicly to tell everyone that there was no coup. Think about that for a moment. Military leaders rarely call press conferences just to say that nothing has happened. So why did they feel the need to speak? Was there really no danger? Or was the government trying to calm a nation that has seen too many governments rise and fall through force? Because this is not just any country. This is the Central African Republic, a nation where the sound of gunfire has changed governments more times than many people could remember. A country blessed with gold, diamond, timber, uranium, yet millions of its people still struggle to find enough food to eat. Just as rumors of another possible coup began spreading across the country, a court in the capital opened the trial of one of the most controversial leaders in African history, a former president, a former military commander, a man who once captured the presidency through a coup, a man whose name still divides the country today. Coincidence? Maybe. Or perhaps Africa's past is refusing to stay buried, because in Africa, history doesn't always stay in history. Sometimes it walks back in today's headlines. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the Central African Republic. Welcome to AfriArise. Here, we don't just report African news, we explain the history behind it. We connect today's headlines with yesterday's decisions. And most importantly, ask the questions that many international media outlets never ask. So today, we are going beyond the rumors, beyond the politics, beyond the headlines. And we are asking, what is really happening inside the Central African Republic? Imagine waking up one morning and opening your phone. Everywhere you look, people are saying your government is about to fall. Some claim soldiers are moving. Others say the president has already escaped within hours. Fear spreads faster than facts. Markets become quieter. Businesses hesitate. Families begin calling relatives. People start preparing for the worst. That is exactly why rumors can become dangerous even when they are false. Recently, reports began circulating online claiming that there was no plot to overthrow the government of President Faustin Taldara. The story spread rapidly across social media. Soon enough, they became impossible to ignore. Then something happened that immediately caught attention. The Central African Armed Forces, known by their French abbreviation FACA, released an official statement. The message was simple: there was no coup, no military takeover, no rebellion inside the armed forces, no attempts to remove the president. They insisted that the country's institutions remain functional and that the military remain loyal to the government. They also warned citizens against spreading false information, saying such rumors could threaten national security and create unnecessary panic. On the surface, that sounds reassuring. But in countries with long histories of political instability, even the denial becomes a news because the question naturally flows. What made the military feel the need to respond at all? Military institutions usually prefer silence. They rarely explain themselves to the public unless something significant is happening behind the scenes. That doesn't automatically mean there was no coup plot. There is no confirmed evidence of one. But it does tell us something important. The rumors had become powerful enough that the remaining silent was no longer an option. And once you understand the history of Central African Republic, you begin to understand why. This is not a country where coup rumors sound impossible. This is a country where coups have shaped almost every generation. Since gaining independence from France in 1960, governments have repeatedly been removed through force. Presidents have come and gone. Military leaders have taken power. Rebel groups have marched towards the capital. entire governments have collapsed almost every night. So when people in Bangui hear the word coup, they don't hear speculation, they hear experience. They remember history, and history has taught them that political crises in their country often begin with a whisper before they become headlines. That's why this story deserves more than just a quick news report, because behind one rumor lies decades of conflicts, decades of poverty, and decades of unanswered questions. Or perhaps the biggest question is this: why did these rumors appear at exactly the same time that one of Africa's most famous former coup leaders returned to the headlines? That is where this story becomes far more interesting, because the man standing trial is no ordinary former president. His name has shaped the destiny of the Central African Republic for more than 20 years. And understanding him may help explain why one rumor has captured the attention of an entire nation. Let's find out. There are former presidents, and then there are former presidents whose names continue to shape a country's future long after they leave office. In the Central African Republic, one name still carries that weight: François Bozizé. To some, he is a patriot who tried to restore order during difficult times. To others, he represents one of the darkest chapters in the country's history. But when people admire him or criticize him, one thing is certain: no serious conversation about the Central African Republic can ignore his role, because Bozizé did not become president through an election. He came to power the way many leaders in the country's history has done before him, through force. In 2003, when President Felix was out of the country, Bozizé and his fighters marched into Bangui, the capital. Within days, the government had fallen. The presidency was his. For many citizens exhausted by years of instability, the takeover brought hope. People believed that perhaps this military leader could restore peace. Perhaps he could unite a deeply divided nation. Perhaps he could finally unlock the enormous wealth built beneath the country's soil. Because the Central African Republic is not poor because it lacks natural resources. Far from it. Beneath the land lies rich deposits of gold, diamonds, uranium, timber, and other valuable materials. On paper, it should be one of Africa's wealthiest nations. For decades, conflict has prevented that wealth from improving the lives of ordinary citizens. As Bozizé settled into power, expectations were high. But governing the Central African Republic proved far more difficult than capturing it. Armed groups continue to emerge. Communities remain divided. Large parts of the country stay beyond government control. Instead of lasting stability, violence continued to spread. Then came another turning point. In 2013, nearly a decade in power, Bozizé himself was overthrown. A coalition of many Muslim rebel groups, known as Seleka, advanced towards Bangui. The government collapsed. Bozizé fled into exile. It was a dramatic reminder of how quickly power could change hands in the Central African Republic. The man who had seized power through a coup had himself removed by force. But his story did not end there. Many former African leaders disappeared from politics after leaving office. Bozizé did not. Years later, his name returned to the headlines. In late 2020, as the country prepared for presidential elections, a new armed alliance emerged. It was called the Coalition of Patriots for Change, often shortened to the CPC. Authorities accused Bozizé of supporting the coalition. The alliance launched a major offensive and pushed towards Bangui. For many people, terrifying memories returned. Would the capital fall once again? Would another government be overthrown? The fighting intensified. Thousands of civilians fled their homes. Roads became unsafe. Fear spread across the country. But this time, history took a different turn. Government forces, backed by foreign allies, stopped the river advance before the Bangui could be captured. The president remained in power. Intended offensive failed. Bozizé once again found himself outside the country. Today, he lives in exile. Yet, despite being far from Bangui, his influence continues to shape political discussions. This is why his current trial has attracted so much international attention. The Special Criminal Court, created with support from the international community to investigate serious crimes committed during years of conflict, is trying him in absentia. He faces allegations linked to crimes committed during his years in office, including accusations involving murder, torture, rape, and enforced disappearances allegedly carried out by members of security forces under his command. Bozizé has denied wrongdoing through his legal team, and the court process is continued. Like any criminal proceeding, the allegations remain matters for the court to determine. The significance of the trial goes beyond one individual. Across Africa, many former leaders accused of serious abuses never faced a courtroom. Some retired peacefully, others live comfortably in exile. Very few are formally brought before judges. Whether this trial ultimately changes anything remains to be seen, but symbolically, it sends a message. It says that even former heads of state can still be called to answer difficult questions about their time in power. Now think back to where this story began. Rumors of another possible coup. An army publicly denying these rumors, and almost at the same moment, the trial of the country's most famous coup leader begins. Does that prove that the two events are connected? No, there is no public evidence confirming such a link. But timing has a way of raising questions. And in countries with painful political histories, people naturally look for patterns. So wonder whether old political loyalties still exist. Others believe the rumors may simply have gained attention because Bozizé's trial placed the country's past back into the spotlight. While the explanation, one fact is impossible to ignore. The Central African Republic is still living with decisions made years ago. Its history continues to influence its present, and that brings us to an even bigger question. Why has this country, so rich in natural resources, struggled for so many decades to achieve lasting peace and prosperity? The answer is not found in politics. It is also found in the everyday lives of millions of ordinary Central Africans. Because behind every headline about coups and courtrooms is a population fighting a much quieter battle, a battle to survive. Sometimes, the biggest mystery in Africa is not why countries are poor. It is when countries that are so rich remain poor. The Central African Republic is one of the clearest examples of this contradiction. Take a look beneath its soil and you'll find enormous wealth. Gold, diamonds, timber, uranium, vast forests, fertile farmland. On paper, this country has everything needed to build a strong economy. Yet, for millions of Central Africans, daily lives tells a different story. For many families, simply finding enough food for the day is a struggle. In rural communities, children often walk long distances to attend schools that lack teachers, books, or even proper classrooms. Many villagers still have little or no access to reliable electricity. Healthcare remains difficult to reach, especially outside major towns. Roads become almost impassable during rainy season, cutting entire communities off from markets, hospitals, and government services. This is not just an economic problem, it affects every part of life. Imagine being a farmer who grows enough crops to feed your family. Now imagine having no reliable road to transport those crops to a nearby town. Your harvest begins to spoil before buyers can reach you. You worked hard, the land produced, but you still remain poor. That story is repeated across many parts of the country. Development does not happen simply because resources exist. It happens when governments can provide security, build infrastructure, attract investments, and create institutions that people trust. Unfortunately, decades of conflict has made each of these goals far more difficult. Every new wave of violence pushes development further away. Schools close, businesses shut down, foreign investors hesitate, families flee their home. Children grow up surrounded by uncertainty instead of opportunity. The cycle repeats itself. Conflict creates poverty. Poverty fuels frustration. Frustration makes instability easier to exploit. And instability discourages the very investment needed to break the cycle. It becomes a trap, one that is difficult for any nation to escape. The resource paradox. Perhaps the greatest irony is this: countries blessed with valuable natural resources often face challenges that countries without those resources never even experience. Economists sometimes call it the resource cost. Instead of creating prosperity, valuable minerals can now become prizes fought over by armed groups, political elites, and even foreign interests. Rather than building factories, hospitals, or universities, the competition shifts towards controlling mines and mineral exports. The Central African Republic has experienced this reality for decades. Control over resource-rich areas has often become just as important as control over the government itself. That is one reason peace has been so difficult to achieve. When enormous wealth lies on the ground, conflict can become profitable for those who control access to it. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens receive very little of the benefits. This is not a problem unique to the Central African Republic. Across Africa, several resource-rich nations have faced similar challenges. The lesson is clear. Natural wealth alone does not guarantee national prosperity. Strong institutions matter. Peace matters. Good governance matters. Without them, even the richest lands can produce widespread poverty. Whenever news about Africa reaches international media, the focus is often on conflicts, coups, wars, violence, humanitarian crisis, but behind every headline are millions of ordinary people who simply want normal lives. Parents who want their children to finish school, farmers who want safe roads to sell their harvests, business owners who want stable electricity, young people searching for jobs instead of opportunities to join armed groups. That is what stability really means. It is not just the absence of fighting, it is the presence of opportunity. Without stability, governments spend more money on security than on development. Instead of building new schools, they buy military equipment. Instead of attracting investors, they reassure international partners that the country remains safe. Instead of discussing innovation, they discuss survival. That is why every coup rumor, even one that proves false, has consequences. Investors become cautious. Tourists stay away. Businesses delay expansion. International confidence weakens. The economy suffers. Sometimes, the rumor itself causes damage even when nothing actually happens. And this is why the recent statement from the Central African military mattered. Whether the rumors were completely baseless or simply exaggerated, the authorities clearly wanted to prevent fear from spreading further. Because confidence is fragile. Once people begin believing that another conflict is around the corner, rebuilding trust becomes way harder. But while internal stability remains a challenge, another powerful force has become increasingly important in shaping the country's future. That is force. That force is not inside the Central African Republic. It comes from thousands of kilometers away. Its influence stretches from Europe to Africa. Its presence has changed the balance of power across several African nations. And nowhere has that influence become more visible than in Bangui. And that brings us to one of the biggest geopolitical stories in the continent today: Russia's growing role in the Central African Republic. When many people hear the words Central African Republic, they think about poverty. Others think about civil war. But over the past few years, another name has become impossible to ignore: Russia. The relationship between the Central African Republic and Russia did not happen overnight. It grew out of a simple but urgent problem. The government needed help. For years, armed groups controlled large parts of the country. The national army was under-equipped, under-trained, and struggling to secure vast areas outside the capital. Entire communities lived under constant fear of rebel attacks. The government faced a difficult question: who would help restore security? Several international partners had already involved in different ways. The United Nations maintained one of its largest peacekeeping missions in the world inside the country. Regional organizations also worked to support peace efforts. But despite these efforts, insecurity remained a serious challenge. It was during this period that Russia expanded its presence. Russian military instructors arrived to help train government forces. Russian security personnel also became increasingly involved in supporting the country's military operations. For the government in Bangui, this partnership represented an opportunity to strengthen national security at a time when it was desperately needed. And over time, that cooperation deepened. A battle that changed everything. One event in particular transformed the relationship. In late 2020 and early 2021, armed rebel groups advanced towards Bangui. There were real fears that the capital could fall. And if that had happened, the country's political future might have changed dramatically. Government forces, supported by the international partners, including Russian personnel, managed to stop that in advance. The capital remained under government control. For many supporters of the government, that moment became proof that the partnership had made a difference. To them, Russia helped prevent another violent change of power. Many citizens who had experienced years of insecurity saw improved protection in some areas compared with previous periods of conflict. That perspective continues to shape public opinion inside the country. But every partnership also raises difficult questions, especially when national security becomes closely connected to foreign support. Security comes at a cost. Nothing in international politics is completely free. Military cooperation often brings economic agreements, strategic partnerships, long-term influence. The Central African Republic possesses valuable natural resources: gold, diamonds, timber. These resources are central to the country's economy. Over the years, reports from international organizations, researchers, and journalists have highlighted Russian-linked business interests operating in parts of the country's mining sector. Supporters argue that these investments help develop industries and strengthen economic ties. Critics question whether ordinary citizens receive enough benefit from the wealth generated by these resources. That debate continues today, and it is part of a much larger conversation happening across Africa. How can African nations welcome foreign investment while ensuring that the natural wealth primarily benefits their own people? It is a question without an easy answer, because every country faces different security needs, economic realities, and political pressure. A changing Africa. The Central African Republic is not the only African country threatening ties with Russia. In recent years, several African governments have explored new partnerships with different powers. Some work more closely with China, others strengthen relationships with Turkey, India, the Gulf states, Europe, or the United States. Many are also expanding cooperation with Russia. What does this tell us? Africa is changing. For decades, many African countries depend heavily on a small number of international partners. Today, governments increasingly seek multiple partnerships instead of relying on only one. Some leaders describe this as a more independent foreign policy. Others see it as a political response to changing global politics. Whichever view one takes, one thing is clear: Africa is becoming a more important arena in global competition, and countries like the Central African Republic not find themselves at the center of that geopolitical interest. Their minerals matter, their strategic location matters, their political stability matters, because whoever builds strong partnership in Africa today may shape economic opportunities for decades to come. Perhaps the biggest lesson from this entire story is not about one rumor, or about one former president, or even one foreign partner. It is about something much deeper. Political stability cannot depend forever on military strength alone. Real stability comes when citizens trust their institutions, when young people can find meaningful jobs, when schools produce opportunities instead of frustration, when hospitals function, when roads connect villages to markets, when farmers earn enough to support their families, when elections are trusted, when justice is seen to be fair. These are the foundations of lasting peace. Without them, every rumor feels believable. Every political disagreement becomes dangerous. Every election becomes tense. Every change in leadership creates uncertainty. It is the challenge facing not only the Central African Republic, but many countries across the continent. Africa's future will not be decided only by soldiers. It will also be decided by teachers, by engineers, entrepreneurs, doctors, farmers, young innovators, and ordinary citizens who believe their country can become something better. Because history shows us something remarkable. Countries can recover. Nations that once experienced repeated conflict have rebuilt themselves before. It takes time, it takes leadership, it takes institutions, and above all, it takes the determination of the people themselves. The Central African Republic story is still being written. When news first broke about an alleged coup plot in the Central African Republic, many people focused on one question: did it happen or not? That is an important question. But perhaps it is not the most important one, because when the rumors were true, exaggerated or completely false, they exposed something much deeper. They reminded us how fragile confidence can become when a country has spent decades living through political instability. In nations where institutions are strong, a rumor often dies within hours. People wait for official information, life continues, businesses stay open, schools still remain full. But in countries where history has been shaped by repeated conflict, a single rumor can spread like wildfire. Not because people enjoy gossip, but because history has taught them that sometimes rumors can become reality. That is the burden the Central African Republic continues to carry. Its greatest challenge today may not simply be security, it's rebuilding trust. Trust between citizens and the government. Trust in public institutions. Trust that elections can be peaceful. Trust that justice applies equally to everyone. And trust that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. That kind of trust cannot be created with one speech, or one military statement, or even one election. It takes years of consistent leadership, accountability, and national unity. 3 questions every African should always think about. As we bring this story to a close, let's leave politics aside for a moment and ask ourselves 3 bigger questions. First, can a nation truly become stable if generations of young people continue to grow without enough education, jobs, and opportunities? Security is important, but long-term peace depends just as much on hope as it does on soldiers. Young people with opportunities are far less likely to be drawn into violence than young people who see no future. Second, Africa is one of the richest continents on earth in terms of natural resources. Yet, many resource-rich countries continue to face poverty. Why? Is the challenge simply corruption, poor governance, conflicts, foreign influence, or is it a combination of all these factors? Finding honest answers to these questions is essential not just for the Central African Republic, but for the future of the continent. Third, as global powers compete for influence in Africa, how can African nations build partnerships that protect both their security and their sovereignty? International cooperation is not unusual. Every nation works with partners. The real challenge is ensuring that those partnerships strengthen the country without reducing its ability to make independent decisions on the long run. That balance is one of the defining questions facing Africa in the 21st century. That is why Africa deserves reporting that goes beyond sensational headlines. Reporting that asks difficult questions, reporting that explains the history behind today's events, reporting that treats African stories with the depth they deserve. Because Africa is far more than conflict. It is resilience, it is potential, it is innovation, it is a continent filled with people determined to build a better future despite their enormous challenges. The Central African Republic has survived decades of instability. Its people have shown remarkable resilience through conflict, displacement, and hardship. The hope now is that the new chapter in its history will be written not by bullets, but by ballots, not by fear, but by opportunities, not by rumors, but by lasting peace. If you found this documentary informative, don't keep it to yourself. Share with someone who wants to understand Africa beyond the headlines, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. What do you believe is the biggest obstacle to lasting peace in the Central African Republic? Is it political instability, economic hardship, foreign influence, weak institutions, or something else entirely? We would love to hear your perspective. If you are new to AfriArise, this is what we do. We tell African stories with context, history, and balance, not fear, not propaganda, and not stereotypes. But understanding Africa starts with listening to Africa. Thank you for watching. My name is Blessing Grace, and this is AfriArise. See you in the next one.